This Mr. Osborne's punishment budget, if we vote to leave, it's crashed and burned on takeoff, hasn't it?
Well, I don't think it's a punishment budget. I think what George Osborne is doing is he's making a very important point, which is a point really that we have to get across, that we know that there will be an economic shock if we leave the European Union. Every credible analysis of the economy says that there will be a significant impact on our economy. This is really very serious stuff.
How big did the Treasury? How big did the Treasury say the impact would be?
George's budget proposal sets out the kind of changes you would have to see to fill that black hole.
How big did the Treasury? How big did the Treasury say the impact would be in its short-term report? What was its central forecast?
What the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
No, I've asked you about the Treasury because that's your government's department.
What the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
Excuse me, I asked you about apples. You answer about oranges. Let me try again.
Well,
tell me what was the central forecast for recession in the Treasury short-term report.
What I'm telling you is that this budget that George Osborne is setting out with Alistair Darling is based on the Institute of Fiscal Studies estimate, which is a 20 to 40 billion pound impact on the public finances. And George has quite rightly taken a mid-range, 30 billion. If there is to be a mid-range impact on the public finances, this is what it would mean.
The Treasury said the economy
to increase taxes, and it would mean having to cut spending.
The Treasury said that the economy would go down by 0.4% over a year. Now, nobody wants it to go down at all, obviously. But why does a reduction, a recession, and shallow recession, the shallowest since 1956, of 0.4%, result in this massive punishment in tax rises and spending cuts amounting to 30 billion? Explain that.
Well, you're using this word punishment. What George Osborne and Alistair Darling are doing, united together, the first time they've spoken together as one on a public platform, is to say there will be an impact on the public finances, and when a Chancellor sees the impact on the public finances, he or she has to act, and they have to make very tough decisions, and those tough decisions will include raising taxes or cutting spending.
I was trying to work out why this response would be required, given how shallow the Treasury said the recession would be.
In terms of the impact, you've seen, for example, Rolls-Royce today saying, talking about the potential impact on Brexit, one of our most successful manufacturing companies. You've seen BT yesterday telling its 80,000 employees the kind of impact that it would have. I think the real point here, Andrew, is, you know, you can bring up different surveys and say, well, what about this and that and that?
Well, I didn't. I only brought up the Treasury.
Everybody knows, the two key points are, everybody knows there will be an economic shock. And what George Osborne is saying, the second key point, is that means there will have to be an emergency budget where we will have to address levels of spending and levels of taxes to get the budget back on track.
How would you get that emergency budget through? There's not a majority in the Commons for it.
Well, we've had the letter. I haven't seen all the names, but obviously
57 Conservative MPs described Mr. Osborne's position as, quote, untenable. There is no majority in Parliament for this budget, therefore the budget wouldn't get through.
Well, what George Osborne is saying is this is the kind of budget that you would have to expect if we leave. I think it's a perfectly valid thing for a Chancellor, somebody who's been Chancellor for 6 years, who's seen us through an economic crisis. You know, unemployment fell again today.
Now, I understand
a lot of what George Osborne has done.
Please address my point.
The economy back on track.
You only have a majority of under 16. At times it's only 12. 57 Tory MPs and rising regard this threat as untenable. They will not vote for it. They've warned you. Labour's not going to vote for it. I assume we'll find out in a minute from John Mann. You could not get this budget through. It's an empty threat.
It's not an empty threat. It's a credible example.
How would you get it through Parliament?
The kind of changes you would have to make if we left. Well, Parliament, after a leave vote, if there is a, God forbid, a leave vote, Parliament will have to reconvene. The Chancellor will have to set out what he thinks the risks are going to be.
He won't be Chancellor, will he?
On the public finances. And then there will have to be a budget proposed by the Chancellor.
He won't be Chancellor.
And at that point, MPs will have to very much decide what their duty is. Is their duty to help get the economy back on track, given the economic shock of leaving the economic union? Could you explain the logic? Or is it simply to say, well, we're just going to be a roadblock?
Could you explain the economic logic? Or give me any major economist in the world would think this is a response. That if we are heading to recession as a result of leaving, which is the Chancellor's scenario, we go into recession, what is the economic logic as a recession stares us in the face that we raise tax and cut spending?
Well, as I said earlier, the Chancellor is someone who's stewarded the public finances for the last 6 years. We see one of those results today with the 20,000 fall in unemployment.
What's the economic logic?
We've seen long-term unemployment falls significantly, and that's because he did get the public finances.
But what is the economic logic of raising taxes and cutting spending as we're heading into a recession?
I'm about to tell you, he balanced the budgets over the last 6 years, well, at least significantly reduced our deficit.
He's balanced the budget.
Significantly reduced our deficit because
what's the size of the deficit?
He had to raise some taxes, and he had to cut.
He slowed down the spending.
He
said he would. Excuse me, Ed
spending.
Vaizey, you can't be allowed. You may be rewriting the future. We won't know till we reach there, but you can't be allowed to rewrite the past. He actually slowed down the spending cuts because we were in recession, and instead of balancing the budget by 2015, which was his promise, he gave us an £80 billion deficit. So I ask again, can you name any credible economist, because Remain is very keen to quote mainstream economists, who would think that slashing spending and increasing tax would be a credible response to a recession?
Well, no doubt economists might pile in after this, as they've piled in on this whole issue of whether we should leave the European Union.
Well, give me one.
And when I was last on this programme, you asked Kate Hoey to name any credible economist who could say that leaving the European Union would be good for our economy.
So you're bringing up Kate Hoey. Well, I'm asking you. I'm asking you. Can you name?
Well, I'm asking you. The European Union would be good for our economy.
I am asking you. Can you name an economist? Can you name an economist that thinks this would be a proper reaction? Don't try and filibuster. You did it before, and it didn't go down too well. Just answer this question.
That balances.
Name an economist that thinks the Osborne's punishment budget would be the correct response. Just name one.
Well, you know full well over the last 6 years when George took decisions.